Hello everyone. Now we look at a game from the sixth round of the Tata Steel Masters tournament, game between Jorden Foreest and Gukesh. Let's check it out. Starts with e4 and e5. This seems to be a fairly popular opening these days, especially in the Tata Steel. Knight f3 and knight c6 and d4, the Scotch. This is the first time we're seeing this, at least on my channel. E takes d4, knight takes d4, and queen f6. Knight b3, avoiding any trades. Queen g6, putting pressure on g2 and making development a little difficult. f3, securing e4. Bishop to d6, knight c3, and knight ge7. f4 now. Bishop to b4, this is all opening theory. f5 and queen f6. Bishop to d3, bishop takes c3, b takes c3, queen takes c3, and bishop d2. So white has given up a pawn but has gotten some rapid development in compensation. Queen goes back to f6 and castles kingside. d6, king h1, just a prophylactic move, getting out of that open diagonal. Bishop d7, a4, knight e5. Couple of ideas to play in this position. There could be knight a5 going after b7 and provoking b7 and rerouting to knight c4. And after knight takes d3, c takes d3, d5, knight e3, d into and d into. The pawn structure has been solidified for white, and this is fine to play for both sides actually. Maybe there could be some ideas of attacking on the semi-open c file later, but c5 could be played, so it's balanced, and the black still has to decide where will the king go. Bishop c3 was also an alternative. There's knight cd7 and knight d2, queen h4 and queen b1, and we'll pile up on that diagonal and put pressure on e5 and then on g7. Maybe the knight can come on f3 next. That's possible. Queen e1 was chosen by Jorden. Knight 7 to c6. g6 was also an interesting idea, just putting some pressure on that pawn advance, and bishop c3 first. G takes, e takes, and castles queenside, and this would be quite sharp. So g file is semi-open and ripe for black's use and attack. This could be quite interesting as well, but Gukesh played in a more solid way. And rook b1, going after that b pawn eventually. a5 first, knight c1 and knight b4. That's another way to defend the b pawn. Queen g3, also defending on d3. h6 here, preventing bishop g5. Knight e2, and it's reasonable to just grab this pawn. And knight f4 and then offer the queen trade, and white would decline. Knight f4 is there to prevent any pawn loss with knight into d3, and this is quite fine. Black is up 2 pawns, and if white is not careful, white could be in trouble. This is perfectly fine, but Gukesh played g5 here, and this is a bit different now. F takes g6 and queen takes g6, and then queen e3 is quite reasonable. So black still has a pawn, but now the f file is also open for white, and it's fair. But queen f2 was played, and this is not so good because this simply leads to knight into b3, c into d3, knight into d3. A second pawn has been won by black. Queen d4, but there is no picking up the piece because rook g8 threatens mate on g2, so knight g3 has to be played, and then knight c5. Black escapes and is up 2 pawns. e5 now, sensible. You want to open up lines when the king is in the center. Bishop c6 was an interesting way to play this. E takes d6 and then queen takes g6, and if you throw in a check, king d8. And after a swap of queens, black is still ahead, up 2 pawns, and this is fine. Knight e6 was played, hitting the queen, and well, the queen could go to h4 and allow d into e5 and rook into b7. This is possible. Bishop to c6 now. rook b2 and rook d8. So in this variation, black stays in the center, but black is still better because black is up 2 pawns. Queen b2 was played, putting pressure on the b pawn this way, but simply bishop c6. Defends the b pawn, puts pressure on g2, e takes d6, and black castles queenside finally. D takes c7 and rook d4. A better place is rook d3 because it keeps the d4 square free for the knight to occupy, and then the knight can maneuver itself to maybe f5. So let's say bishop e1, just getting out of the way, knight d4. There could be ideas of even sacking a bishop on g2 sometime if the queen moves. Rook b3 is possible to trade some pieces and put pressure. So this could be even better, but rook g4 is also fine. The rook will come to h4. And at this point, well, rook bc1 was played. It doesn't really matter, but slightly better would be rook fc1 because this keeps pressure on b7. That battery is there, and let's say rook h4, bishop e1, knight f4. This is all very good for black anyway. But rook bc1 and rook h4 and rook c3 now. There is no battery on the b file. h5 would be a good idea here. It's to an extent a waiting move, but there are threats of the rook moving and maybe h4. Let's say you try something like rook into c6, then rook into h2 is possible. King g1, because going into g3 would be the threat, but rook into g2. And you capture with check and you'll mate very soon. So after h5, let's say queen b6, just keeping an eye on that pawn, and maybe now some ideas could be there, but knight into c7 simply. Rook to b3 and queen d6. Rook into f7, rook into a4. And then h4 can come later. So after h5, let's say bishop e1, then rook f4. Rook takes, rook into f1, knight into and b into. Knight e3, knight c7. This could be played. So h5 is a very interesting move indeed. Just forcing white to make a move and compromise in some way or the other. But knight c5 was played. And rook to e3 here. Of course, there's no time to grab that knight because rook into h2 would be very strong. The rook has to defend that g3 knight. Rook into a4 was played, but queen g4 were actually winning very, very soon because there's pressure of queen h3. So the king would have to go to g1 to avoid that pin, but bishop takes g2, king takes, and queen h3 is very strong. King f2 would have to be played, rook f4 now, and we have a king hunt. Knight takes and rook g2 even. And the king we see is running away, and sooner or later we will connect the king and with the knight. Let's say king c1, then queen c4. Queen c3, queen into f1, and we pick up that piece back. Rook g6 as an example. So queen g4 was very, very strong indeed. There's going to be a lot of pressure, but rook into a4, still black is better. Rook f6, this is the problem with rook into a4. Rook into a4 was that rook f6 gives some counterplay to white. Queen g7 now, and bishop c3. This is annoying. You were ahead, and now there's some counterplay, and that battery will be annoying. Queen g5 now, and rook e2 was fairly decent. There could be something like knight d3 here, hitting the queen, but then queen b1. Black is still better. Knight could eventually move to maybe f4 perhaps. That's possible. But queen e2 is not so strong. Essentially the question is how do you defend that rook? But then now knight e6. And white plundered here with rook f5 because it allows bishop into g2. If you capture, then queen into f5 simply, but king g1 here. Queen takes f5, so we'll temporarily sacrificing our queen. Knight takes and bishop f3. We'll pick up the queen on the next move. King f2, bishop into e2, knight into e7, check, king into c7, and bishop e5, king b6, and knight g8. Bishop to h5, knight takes h6, knight to c5, king to g3 and knight e4 check, king to f4, and after bishop g6, white resigned because, well, black is up 2 pieces. So just small. There were small inaccuracies here and there, and that allowed a big advantage. But ultimately, black was up 2 pawns and had quite an open position. And even though black castled very late, the pieces were fairly active, and that's how Gukesh won. So a nice victory for Gukesh. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon with the next game.